Okay. Hello. Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. And first, I want to thank Vanya and the good people of Monash University, Indonesia, for the invitation to present today. I did beat the traffic and made it on time, which is not that easy here in Jakarta. So today, I'm going to present a little bit of a survey of where we are at with generative AI applied to creative domain. And that will be my opportunity to do so by introducing some of the work we do at the Meta Creation Lab for Creative AI at the School for Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, where I come from today. So I'm not going to introduce to this expert crowd what AI is, but I want to say that today I'm not really going to talk about general artificial intelligence and whether AI is going to take over the world and debunk humans, but I'm going to talk about what's already existing and still growing, which is this idea of automating tasks. And with the Industrial Revolution, as humans, we managed to automate physical tasks very much so throughout the 20th and 19th century. And now we are at a stage of our evolution where we start automating cognitive tasks. Apart from a computer and a human brain, there's nothing that can do a six-figure multiplication in this world. And so AI, in that sense, is a moving front of automating increasingly complex tasks. And in that sense, those tasks might require usually typically human intelligence. And so it is, in that sense, artificial intelligence. And what I'm going to talk about today is what we do at the Meta Creation Lab, which is focusing really on the partial or complete automation of creative tasks using generative algorithm. And we do that across domain. And today I'll take example in music, in visuals, in movement generation, in game generation, and all sorts of computer-mediated content generation. And from an AI and a computer science perspective, I'm a mathematician by training. While it's really hard to define what creativity is, it's still a debate amongst philosophers. It's been going on for 2000 years. It is actually quite easy to define what a creative task is. And the creative task is interesting for computer scientists because it's the type of task for which there's no clear optimal outcome. There's no clear Pareto dominance. There's no clear utility function. It's more complicated to define, and it makes it a little bit more challenging to automate. In a way, there is no such thing as the best graphic design, drawing, painting, joke, recipe, outfit, etc. There is a non-objective, a subjective dimension to all of those task and content appreciation. And so it makes it interesting from a computer science perspective. The way we do it at the Meta Creation Lab is using a multidisciplinary approach in which we do scientific research and we publish papers with algorithms. We make evaluations of those algorithms. When they work really well, we work with the industry to integrate them into products. And I'll take examples today of that. And then often, because those algorithms automate creative tasks, we work with artists, and we are artists ourselves somehow, but we work with artists throughout the process so that we do design those algorithms using what we call participatory design. The idea that if we don't involve all the stakeholders from the beginning, we usually end up with something that is great from a computer science perspective, but usually not as useful from an applied perspective. So what I'm going to do today, while I present some examples of the systems and algorithms we came up with in the last almost 20 years that the lab has been around, is to introduce those algorithms looking at two families, which I believe will be the two main contexts for generative AI to be applied in our world. You got on one side embedded generative systems that are capable to respond in a timely fashion and to generate content in real time. And then you got computer-assisted creativity type of system that are systems which typically go back and forth in a turn-taking fashion with a human creator, and the human in the loop is much more present in this second family. So I'll go through that and take examples of each of those two families. Then we'll talk a little bit about evaluation and acceptability of those systems. And then I'll conclude by wrapping up around the challenges and opportunities that are numerous in this field. So let's start with embedded real-time generation. And I'll take the example of musical agents, but that would work with any type of agent. And agents, as you know, is the main paradigm for modern artificial intelligence, is this idea that we have computer systems that are capable to, in real time, sense the world they're in, whether it's a digital world or the real world, in the case of robots, and capable of acting upon that world and in that environment. And at the MetaCreation Lab, we have been working on musical agents for quite a long time now. And we're not the only one. In fact, we have a survey of this type of agents that we issued a few years ago with a typology. And in that survey, we go through more than 80 different agent architecture just in the domain of music. And the field of agents and multi-agent system is a really large and lively field. So ourselves, we've been developing agent architecture, and typically the way it works is the agents will listen to other agents playing music live on stage. Those other agents might be humans, actually, they might be live musicians. Often that's how we use those agents ourselves. And the agents would have been trained ahead of time to have a vocabulary of sound that is organized in ways the agents can retrieve. And the agents has been learning a temporal model and is capable of doing reasoning such as, if Philippe just played this type of notes and I just played this type of notes and I emulate this type of musical style, then what would I generate next so that everything fits together? And that's very similar to what a human does on stage when playing an improvisation, where you have to make up what you're going to play next based on what's happened before. And so here is an example of the agent. In this case, there's no human involved, is the agent playing on its own, and I'll give you an idea of the type of output. This is contemporary music, so it's not made so much of notes than just sounds. And that's an excerpt of the Ars Electronica Festival 2017. And here the agent is coupled with visual generation systems. And you see that the coupling of the sound and the images is very, very tight. In a way, what's interesting with those agents is that we can access some aesthetics that would be very hard to do manually. It would be very hard for someone who has the visual going that fast, and with that level of synchronization with the music. All right, etc. So that gives you an idea of what the agent is capable of. And so we do play shows with my students in various places. This is here in Montreal during the MUTEC Festival, and we'll be playing again there this year at the end of August. And then we run a conference on AI and music called AI Music Creativity, AIMC, and it will be in Belgium this year, the second week of September, for those who are interested. But this notion of musical agents is a really good example of the concept of co-creation, which is a bit different from computer-assisted creativity. In co-creation, you have the idea that the agent, the AI, is part of the system and is generating content in real time along with a human. And so there's no curation of that content. There's no time to say yes or no. It has to be right. And that's a type of setup that we find more and more to be the case. We've been developing further agent architecture, got some base paper award into computer music conferences around those agents. And so that's a first example here of agent architecture. In these versions, PyMuse, you can give feedback to the agents, you can rehearse with the agents and say, hey, I like that part, let's do more of that. I didn't like that part, let's stop doing that. A little bit like humans would do when they rehearse and they adjust the aesthetic they're going for. Another example of real-time generation in which we were really early in 2016, we were using restricted Bozeman machine at the time to generate movement. And here you have real-time movement generation. So this is not the motion capture of an actor. It is trained on the motion capture of several actors. And what it means is that it allows me to control in real time the movement style. I can move from one style of movement to another. So we can use motion capture when we make a movie and linear media, but when we tap into nonlinear media, we need to go generative. There's a real need for that. We can also control the perceived emotion of the movement and other characteristics. And yeah, the reason why we go generative is because if in Vancouver, we have a lot of video game companies. If you develop video games and you have like World of Warcraft, 11 million players playing 20 hours per week, how many actors and motion capture takes do you really need? And the answer is way too many. And those games' budget has been exploding and they really need to go generative, which then raise concerns because those actors, and eventually when they've been mocked up and my model can replicate their movement styles, do we really need them anymore? And so there's already the fear, at least, of work displacements. We were also some of the first in the world to do multimodal generation. Here, this is an agent dancing on generative music. It's not perfect. You can see it's doing with the arm something that you can't do with your arms. I don't recommend you try. But at the time, in 2017, that was pretty good. So those are examples of online embedded generative systems. And so one of the reasons why we need those generative systems is not to replace people or debunk workers, is because of this move mostly from linear to nonlinear media, which usually entails an explosion, an exponential explosion of the number of assets needed. When you make a movie, you can look at every second with a music composer, with actors and motion capture, but when you look at creating worlds, and generating hundreds of hours of content per week, then it becomes impossible to do that manually, really. So that's one reason. Another reason, which I think is more interesting and coming further, is the idea of functional generation. This idea that we want to generate the right content for the right user at the right time. And there's plenty of application coming this way in the medical domain and in education, for example. If you think of education, the only reason we have many students in a classroom is economical. If you're a king or a sultan here in Indonesia, you have your own professor, actually, probably even several of them. And education is, of course, way better when it's personalized and individualized. When we teach at the university, we have to decide, do I teach for the best students? Do I teach for the worst students? Do I teach for the average? I have to make social decisions and social choices. But in fact, with AI, we have now the opportunity, and this is just starting to become a real reality in many domains, We do it for video game, but education, health, and all sorts of domains would be the case. The idea of developing AI that allows for adaptive, personalized experience. In fact, for any interaction, that's true for a conversation, for a course, there is what in cognitive psychology they call the notion of flow, an optimal flow. In other words, let's take the example of games. If a game is too easy, it's for kids, it's too easy, I'm gonna get bored, I'm gonna stop playing that game. If it's too hard, I can't move forward in the game, I always lose, nothing's happening, I'm gonna get discouraged, I'm gonna stop playing that game. The truth is there is this flow zone that you need to be in to be engaged into an interaction. And that flow zone is different from everyone, and it changes dynamically differently for everyone. Some people are fast learners. I know my students are. I'm a slow learner when it comes to games. So if the game becomes more complicated too fast, it's going to lose me. And so we are now at the moment where we don't only can generate content, but try to track the type of content that keep the user engaged and generate that particular content for that particular user. And these are not just ideas. We actually did the work in the context of games and won some competition, generating some levels, trying to track what is the level of the player and how do we generate something that it falls into the flow zone for that given players. And we also generate the music that goes with the level and all sorts of things. Typically what we do is we have an agent that in real time analyze where the player is at. And this agent informs a system that will generate the content, the levels, and that we generate the experience, including the music. And because we're scientists this way, we do evaluation of the systems, and we in fact show that it does improve the emotion, the immersion, the enjoyment of the player compared to a game in which those levels would have been canned ahead and the progression would have been fixed. So this is really the set of reasons I want to put forward for which we need generative systems. So often when I talk to artists, I get pushback that we are evil and we're going to take their work. But as a matter of fact, there's a number of things that we can do that they can't do, simply can't. Another thing that is coming more and more to be a reality is to move beyond just mere generation. We now have systems that can generate text, images, music at a human competitive level. This has been shown. Now is we go further in why would we generate? What is the consequence of the generation? And we move from mere generation to functional generation. For example, I have students, this has folded now, but they had a company for a few years where you would generate soundscape and music according to a particular goal. You want to work, you want to focus, we generate music for that. Eventually, now with the Apple Watch and other biosensors, we can have the system check that it works. Maybe I generate sound and soundscape. I have a PhD students working on that soundscape to alleviate stress. And then I can measure whether it actually works for you and learn how to generate the right music for the right person, for the right goal, whether you want to fall asleep or on the rivers where you want to go for a run. And so we are entering the world of functional generation. This is more and more the case. In fact, AI is always about generation. What we used to generate is recommendations. When you Google something in a search engine, you get a list of recommendations by the AI. And more we're moving from content recommendation to content generation. In fact, this is so true that now if you Google something, Google will give you the answer at the top using AI. And after that, the links. And actually, Google is getting sued for that because the people whose links these are very unhappy because as well as people clicking on those links, those links. And so that's what I wanted to say about the first family of approaches of real-time embedded generation with a few examples. And I'll move on now to the second family of AI in creative domain, and that's computer-assisted creativity. In this type of approach, you get a back and forth between typically a creator, can be a professional, can be a novice, can be anyone, and then a particular system. We started with my colleague Steve Di Paola from Electronic Arts, the game company, and he's now a faculty with us quite early on in the early 2010s, being able to deploy system that people could use to train their own visual filters and to decide on certain aesthetics and apply them to their pictures in their phone, for example. And then much more recently, in the 2020s, there's been the rise of prompt-based interfaces. And you all know, and I've used, I'm sure, quite a number of them, from ChatGPT in the text domain to DALL-E and others in the visual domain and the music domain. We were actually early there, but we don't have the PR machine of Google, and we don't have a billion users, so nobody knows about it. But in 2012, we came up with this prompt-based system, which is quite early for computer-assisted sound design. You enter a prompt. I want to hear kids playing in the park at night or on the Sunday afternoon. How long the scene is. This is made to do sound design for moving images. What are the emotions, the valence and arousal curves of that soundtrack? I want it to sound happy at the beginning and then maybe scary at the end. And then the system will retrieve sound, find those sounds, put them into timelines, classify them into background sounds and foreground sounds. And then eventually, as a sound designer, you can download this mix. You can either render it and listen to it, or you can download it and edit it in a digital audio workstation like Ableton or etc. And so if, for example, I ask for a waterfall in Thailand, I might get something that sounds like this. And we did several evaluations of this particular system, and we show that it's way better than random, and it saves a lot of time to creators, but it's not as good as a professional sound designer, which is pretty much a good news for sound designers. But what's interesting, and we just did an evaluation that is going to be published at AIMC, the AI Music Conference, in September, and we show that for novice, as well as for professional, it allows to gain a lot of time. And often in computer-assisted creativity, those are the two things that are at stake. Is it will make professional work faster and eventually explore a little bit more before they tune in and fine-tune their content. And then for beginners, it will allow beginners eventually to do things that they would not be capable of doing otherwise, and or it would help them learn how to do the task. In this particular task, finding all those sounds would take maybe a day or two of work, because you get those banks of sounds with millions of sounds, and here there might be 100 sounds involved, and you have to find them one by one, cut them, put them together. That's not really the most interesting part of the work, and if we can automate it, then everyone benefits. Of course, what's interesting if you give those type of systems to creators is that they will eventually use them in creative ways and find their own way around, and maybe make some prompts that are much more abstract and gain some results that are more abstract as well. The system is live, it's online, and you can try it for yourself at audiometaphor.ca. We use it in class to teach sound design to students as well, which is another potential for those systems. So that was early prompt-based audio generation. There was no neural network involved, by the way, if you wonder. And then now that has boomed into a whole world of prompt-based applications for music generation, etc. I believe that everyone is, who does know Udio here? No, maybe not. So Udio is a prompt-based system that is online. You can try it for yourself. This morning I said, hey, generate a happy and catchy people song about Philippe Pasquier presenting his work on generative AI at Monash University, Indonesia, with a female voice. And he came up with this. So this singer doesn't exist.
Philip steps in with a spark in his eye, talking about the future, reaching for the sky. At Monash, Indonesia, the crowd's alive. AI generatives here, watch it thrive. Oh, Philippe, he's got the vibe, breaking.
All right, so that took about 30 seconds for the system. The song is 3 minutes long. I can change the lyrics. I can download all the stems. I can get the partition. And of course, if I don't like it, I can make another one. In fact, here is another one.
Philip steps in with a spark in his eye, talking about the future, reaching for the sky. At Monash, Indonesia, the crowd's alive. IA generatives here, watch it thrive. Oh, Philippe.
All right, and you can do that with any sort of content. You can condition on the style. You can do all sorts of things. And I sometimes give talk to artists and they're like, yeah, but real composers don't really do necessarily just pop music. And for abstract experimental music, this doesn't work. And you're wrong, because here is abstract electroacoustic music, for example. So given how advanced those systems are, stakeholders, artists, but also the people representing those artists aren't happy. And I was just dismissed from being an expert witness in the federal court of the US on some of these cases, so I cannot talk publicly about it a bit more comfortably, but there is a number of lawsuits going on, because what's happening here is what I do in my lab. Under fair deal, as a Canadian researcher, I can scrap the internet for content, and I'll show you how we do that in a second. And then I can train a model, and then the model doesn't replicate the data. What we just heard here is actually really an invented singer with an invented musician and a new composition. It's original material. So it doesn't plagiarize, and then it doesn't contain the data. The model doesn't contain the data either. And so I can take that model and I'll sell it, right? I can't sell the data that I scrapped. That would be completely illegal, but I can do that. And that loophole is now being closed. And in fact, the first case, which is not in creative AI, which is Thomson Reuters against an AI company, the AI company lost, and the federal court of the US decided that if you can maybe scrap the data under fair deal, but if the product you generate with AI is a competition with the people who release the data, then you might be doing something illegal. As I said, Google and many others are getting sued right now for similar reason. There's also a lot of debate about prompting. Is prompting really replacing creativity? There's a lot of papers and studies now about cognitive download. We know that when the GPS arrived, we all stopped being capable of really orienting ourselves in the city. And when I go somewhere, I'm turning left because my Google, one app is telling me to turn left. I probably would get it wrong, especially in Jakarta, most of the time if it was not for that technology. And so our cognitive abilities to orient ourselves has diminished. We can show that experimentally. We now show that people who use AI too much, their critical thinking is diminished, right? So in the context of using it early, in the context of education, it has pros, but it definitely has cons as well. In fact, is it also the case that prompting is enough to be the creator? Who is the author of an image when you prompt DALL-E? Is it you? Is it DALL-E? Is it a collaboration? What is the status of that content? There's also the risk that AI-generated content will outnumber human-generated content. And that's already happening, and there's a number of issues around the rise of synthetic media. The last VO3 models from Google, it's almost impossible to tell that those videos with the sound of the voice, with the lip sync, are actually not humans talking. So in the lab, we've been working on computer-assisted creativity, looking at different approach other than prompting, which we were early on. And we've been doing that in the domain of music with computer-assisted composition. We're not the only one. There's a lot of systems for computer-assisted composition with audio output or with MIDI output. MIDI output is like a score where you do the actual composition, and then musicians will actually play that composition. We sort of prefer that approach in the lab. And here again, we were early. In the early 2010, we had systems working at human competitive level and being deployed in the real world. In fact, here is an example of the composer James Maxwell collaborating with our system Music Cog for a composition. And you see that the composition is then interpreted, printed on as a score and interpreted by real musicians. These are not robots. So that was 2010, 2011, and already was working really well. But now, of course, we have deep learning. And so it works not only really well, but it works for any type of music, any type of instruments. And I think the best model at the moment is our latest publication at AAAI this year. It's called MIDI GPT. It's a very simple GPT-2 transformer with a limited architecture. We also have linear transformers and other ones that are much more powerful. But this one works really well. It knows all of the instruments. It knows all of the music, and it's a bit more versatile than the competition. It does drum tracks. It doesn't force you to have a particular instrumentation, and it's working on doing infilling with attribute control. And I'll talk about it for a second. The reason why the system is so good is the usual reasons, which is twofold. First, we got the data. Using Fair Deal in Canada, we could scrap the data. We just released the largest data set of music content, of symbolic music content, is 2.1 million unique MIDI files. So it's still very tiny compared to the data set people use in image generation or text generation, because it turns out there's not that much musical scores online that are available. But it's still way enough to learn a lot about music, way more than a human can. Usually humans learn music partly by listening to music. These systems have been listening to much more music than a human can. The second ingredient to make this system so powerful is a new tokenization representation, a smart representation. In this case, a lot of the previous systems were intermingling the notes. They would say, oh, there's this note and this note and this note on different tracks. And in our case, we really do, like in a digital audio workstation, we organize things in bars, in tracks, and a music pieces is a sequence of tracks, which when you do BPE, by pair encoding, and things like that, allows the tokenizers to really have a good, powerful representation of music. And the system is based on infilling. In fact, that tokenization is a collaboration with some colleagues in France, and it's been quite successful. I think we are at 173,000 downloads. So quite a surprising number actually for symbolic music. And so the system is not taking textual prompt, because we think that might not be the best way to go. In fact, it's taking existing music as an input. So as a composer, you typically have already music. And even if you're beginners, maybe you can compose a melody. You might not be able to do the chord progression or the rhythm for it. Then you start with some content that you have to provide, and then you use the system. So here's examples of an early Google Colab version of the system. So you see a little bit what infillings mean. So in this case, I take existing compositions and generate variations. So it's just MIDI, so it would need to be interpreted by an orchestra. It doesn't sound great, but the composition is great. And the variation we just heard is copyright free. So I start with something that is actually someone's composition, but if I resample all of the bars, 2 bars at a time, I'm gonna end up with something very similar, because each infilling is constrained by what's before, what's after, what's above, and what's under. But at the end, I will get something completely new, except for the drum part. So what you do with those type of system is we want systems in which you don't really generate from scratch, because often the search space is way too big. You're going to end up with medieval music, something that you don't really want necessarily. You start with existing music and you can regenerate part of that music or all of that music. You can add some tracks. I generated a melody, now give me a bass for it. And then we can control different attributes on the generation. And we can control pretty much any musical attribute you can think of: time signatures, the note durations, the amount of silence in a track, the level of polyphony. Maybe I have a synthesizer with 3 voices of polyphony. I can't generate all of that, but also some high-level features. What is the tension, the musical tension? How happy or sad the music is. So if I make music for film, music is what's going to make people cry and raise the emotion. And so controlling those attributes is really, really useful. Same for video game. If a player has been playing for 200 hours and is about to die, this is not a good time to play happy music. At the same time, in the same game, somewhere else, someone is winning. Yeah. So I need different music for different people. Again, the right content at the right time for the right effect. I'll pass for the sake of time here. And then you got something right, because when we started on that line of work, we were one of the first one making it work really. The industry was knocking at our door, and then there's applications now being deployed, but not being commercialized because everyone is really afraid to be sued. And until there's clarity, you're going to have only 3 types of companies in the world: the companies who can afford going to court, the companies who do only AI, and therefore it's a make it or break it deal for them, and the companies like Ableton or Elias or Teenage Engineering, the company we work with, who already have millions of users and will certainly not take the risk to lose everything because of this one AI feature that they can add to their software. So we did it for video game composers with Elias. We worked for a synthesizer company, Teenage Engineering, deploying those simple interfaces that allow beginners to generate content easily. And as usual, we work with artists and we make ourselves content. And this is an album, for example, we released that is using our system. It's electronic music, so we don't need a human musician. That makes it a little bit simpler. And it's quite successful. And we're trying to press some vinyls for DJs. Right, and so this is available, released by the lab only, because we think we can't be sued. We have the right, as part of the research, to do that, or the university will, and that's less of my problem. But yeah, we make plugins for Ableton. Ableton is 6 million users, and a lot of them, they bought the software, they want to be a musician, but they will never finish a track, right? Only a few % of those 6 million are actually composers and can make the music. So you can try it for yourself. You'll find the link in the slides. We have our own online system as well, which allows you to access this algorithm. Here is, for example, the system remixing some Mozart. This is Mozart. This is the system making a variation on Mozart. So this is original music. Then I can do things Mozart couldn't do. With the bass line and the marimba. So try it for yourself online. Take a MIDI file of your favorite musicians and then make a variation that is yours. Why not? And then we worked on new types of features, because when we have the system, we can do things like, hey, make a variation of that composition, but make it 1,000 times. And then rank those variations according to the original. And then I can find out which one is actually copyright free. A lot of musicians in a lot of studios, they start their week by receiving a phone call saying, hey, we're going worldwide with BBC on this documentary, you need to redo the music because we don't want to pay the copyright. So all those types of use cases are being there. If you're interested in use of AI in music, there's also the AI Song Contest, which runs every year with a lot of bands, lots of humans involved, very little AI. Some of them use the AI for the lyrics, some for the music, some for the composition, some for etc. It's a lot of fun and it's televised. It's broadcasted on TV. It's usually in Europe every year. And then we work with Steinberg, integrating our algorithm into their digital audio workstation. So those are all systems of computer-assisted composition. We did that as well for computer-assisted sound synthesis, and also worked with artists there. But the truth is this family of approach, the second family of approach, will cover pretty much any creative task you can think of. And this is a list here, but whether it's writing, architecture, fashion, design, you name it, there is already an AI for it, and often more than one, actually quite a lot. And if you find a computer-mediated creative task that you think there's no AI for, you let me know. I don't think you will, but if you do, let me know. And the ecosystem is booming. Trillions of dollars have been poured on generative AI, trillions of dollars that probably will not be recovered. This is what people start to realize. So the landscape is changing briefly. Now I want to switch to almost the last part, but I need a little bit time to go through it, is the evaluation of those interfaces and of those algorithms. And when we talk evaluation, of course, there's how successful the music is. Do people buy the concert tickets and the albums? What are the media saying, the critics and all that? But also we're interested in more formal evaluation. So we do work with artists and we get funding by the Canada Council for the Arts to make those collaborations with artists. We actually have in the lab an artistic residency whereby every year we receive a composer that gets to work with our tool and give us feedback about where we are at and how the interface is working. But of course, because we're scientists, we're interested in formal academic scientific evaluations. And so we did that. We did that with expert composers. And by expert, we mean people who make a living out of using Cubase, this particular software. Some of them have been using it for 25 years. And all of a sudden you put this AI in it and you're like, now you have to use it every day. How do you feel? And then we're interested not only in those evaluation studies published at ISCAI last year to show whether the system works, because in fact it sort of does, or whether you gain efficiency and you work faster, because you usually do. But more importantly, what is the notion of agency? When you make music with that system and you're a professional composer, do you feel that this is still your music at the end? Or is it the system music and I was just driving that system? Or is it a collaboration between me and the system and a co-creation in a way of that music? And even more deeper, we had some best paper award at CAI a few years ago for a new methodology called macrophenomenology that allows to, through a specific interview technique, get deeper into, besides the surface level experience, if you have to use that system every day now, how do you feel in the morning? Do you feel like vomiting? Do you feel good? Do you feel excited? Do you feel bored? Do you feel that you're still empowered as a creator to use those systems? And we think this is really important to cover those dimensions as well. I won't go through the detail of the study. You can look at the paper. We also looked at instruments that are rarely only looked at by the industry, which is a set of research instruments called the technology acceptance model, and there's many versions of it, which are instruments that try to predict through a short study, because we can't study those systems for years. My PhD students need to graduate, and so often the studies are quite short, a few weeks, maybe a few months, but try to predict, based on a short study, whether in the long run, people will, after the experience, continue to use those systems. Or if it was just nice to do the evaluation experience in a lab, for a few hours, and then after that, I'm never going to touch the system again. And we find, in fact, here you see for professional, that if the tool would be available for their job, they predict that they will use it on a regular basis in the future. And the scores are quite high. So in the end, what we show with those studies is that those systems sort of work and there's a good acceptance there. And then the composers, importantly, feel that they maintain authorship over the final results. And when we get into the detail, the reason why this is the case is because often the composer, the professional, use the system as a what-if machine. What if I put a marimba here? What if you give me 3 violins? Oh, I don't like that. Give me another one. Oh, I like that. And then they start writing the music because in fact, they very rarely use the content generated by the system. This is for professional. Now we do the same experiment for beginners, and then we find that it's very different. Beginners do use the content generated by the system because beginners can't actually write the music. It's not gonna just be an aspiration. They're gonna verbatim, use that exact content and those exact sequence of notes. But beginners, interestingly, can then compose music that there's no way they can compose otherwise, because they sort of become curators instead of content creators. And everyone knows what they like. It's much easier to know what you like and to drive a system in that direction than it is to actually generate things that correspond to what you like. We also do evaluation, but I'll pass briefly because of time. of not just the creators, but the audience. Can people tell when music is AI generated? In fact, we show already in 2012 that people can't. And that's true for beginners, and that's also true for professional composers. They can't tell when it's machine composed. However, the composers have, even when they're wrong as often as the non-composers, they have a lot more arguments for why they think this is a machine and things like that. So they justify that choice a lot more. We also look at the bias. If I tell someone that this is AI generated, do they still like it? If I lie to them, it's actually a music generated by a human, but I tell them this one was made by a machine. It's like, oh, it's made by a machine. I don't really like it. It turns out we didn't find, and some people do this type of experiments, not just in music, but in visual, in text. We didn't find an explicit bias against machine-generated content above chance level. Often in those experiments, we actually use deception. We usually lie to people, and then we reveal. And then we see if after the reveal, the perception has changed. So I will pass here for the sake of time. So yeah, so far we didn't find a lot of bias. There's new experiments that are doing a little bit more, and we try to see if the level of education, familiarity, and computational literacy can be maybe factors that influence people's perception of AI. So that is where we at right now. I just talked to you about those embedded generative systems and the potential of generating the right content at the right time for the right user in any interactive experience, in education, in games, in music playing in our case. And then I talked about AI-assisted creative systems that have the promise of making professionals more efficient at what they do and lower the barrier of entry for beginners. And eventually also providing higher level interface for all. Because on the West Coast of America, where I live, Vancouver, Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco is where the Netflix studios, Amazon, and all of that is being produced. And the creative task in practice is usually a human sitting in a studio, or several humans, or many humans sitting in front of computers, clicking on buttons all day long. Often the same buttons in the same order. It's very repetitive. You wouldn't believe how repetitive the creative industry here. In fact, we talked about the click factory. And so we moved to a world where people were doing repetitive actions in factories, but we automated physical work. Now we are in a world in which people do repetitive work in front of a computer. And that's an issue. And so maybe AI is also a way to get out of that and get the machine to do more of the boring work and put the humans into the seat of the driver or of the boss of that little army of agents. We talked together today. I'm going to wrap up. I still have one more system to present. We talked about the big data issue, the idea that models are trained on scrapped data and all the legal suits that are ensuing. And so what are the solutions here? Well, there's solutions about licensing the data, compensating the artist, and some people are going that way. Adobe, for example, is doing a pretty good job at that. But there's also something to be said about small data and model crafting. So when we train our musical agents, we don't use thousands or hundreds of thousands of musical pieces. Typically, a composer can just use their own material, a little bit of data to train an agent. And we found that there was a real need in the visual domain as well of systems that empower creators, but allowing them not only to exploit an existing model, but to adapt existing models or even train their own model. And if you want to do that now, you can't without going online and giving your data to someone else, typically a private company. And so we find that there was this need for systems that work on small data, no big data, because photographers don't have trillions of pictures, but they might have hundreds, thousands. No cloud, because artists don't want to give their life works data to a cloud anywhere, unless it's really, really trusted, which usually is not. Artists don't want to learn Python, so they don't want to rely on coding and the complexity of what we do here in computer science departments. And eventually, they want direct manipulation to explore the model and be able to really find in those very rich, complex models the places that are interested to them. And if the systems work in real time, it's better. And then if it's free and open source, it's even better. And because there was no such system, and again, if you know one, you let me know, but I don't think there was, we made one. It's called Autolium, and it's free, it's available online. And there's been a growing community of people using it. The interface looks a little bit like this. We're integrating diffusion models now, but so far it's working with StyleGAN, so GAN models, StyleGAN 2, in fact, and you can see it works at video speed, and you can control all of the parameters, including the inner layers of the model without any coding. And the whole thing is also controllable through OSC, so you can really use it as a visual synthesizer. And in fact, some artists do exactly that. So what we mean by direct manipulation is literally that. You can hook up a MIDI controller and navigate the model using tactile interfaces, for example. And that's something that artists are really interested in. So it's been used by ourselves, by artists, a number of exhibitions, number of systems in various domains. This is at Ars Electronica last year, and a collaboration with artists who work with us or on themselves on their computer with the data set and train their own model and explore those models until they're satisfied with the output. And maybe they're gonna release NFTs. So you can make still images, you can make video and moving images as well. And in fact, in some cases, those small data approaches are the only way to really proceed. Because we show, for example, here using DALL-E, one of those largest visual generation models, we show that the model pretends to be able to generate anything and everything. But as a matter of fact, it's not true. And if you try to generate Arabic calligraphy, it looks beautiful, like on the right here, but those are not Arabic characters. It's hallucinating characters because there's not enough Arabic graphic and calligraphy online for the system to catch that on. And in fact, on top of that, online, there's a lot of fake calligraphy because there's a bias called Orientalism that was described in the 70s already by Edouard Said in his book, Orientalism in France, in which the painters from the 19th century who were painting the Arabic world were themselves not capable of, they didn't really care about the Arabic calligraphy. It just has to look like if it was Arabic calligraphy. They were painting for European, usually men, for a white audience that didn't know Arabic. So there was no problem there. And so here you have the two bias of underrepresented content. And then you have also a confirmation bias because some of the content that is actually represented is already biased itself, right? So if you want to do Arabic calligraphy, then you have no choice. You have to train your own model. And that's exactly what we do with my PhD students, Asha Soban, and then using it in more contemporary calligraphic situations. And but we show that the model is actually not deviating from existing characters. Yeah, Autolium is also used on stage, and we'll be playing with it this year at MUTEC Festival. So I'll pass on the example. So while typically with systems like DALL-E, you have here, you're in the top left corner where you have to use a model trained on existing data, typically scrapped from the internet, and you can only navigate it through prompting or other means. Then with Autolium, you can really use curated or created data that are ethically sourced and either adapt, fine-tune existing models if they are ethically provided, or craft your own model. And then we feel that that gives a bit more creative control over the entire process because we know how central the data and their quality are to those models. So if you want, we give workshops on this. We've been touring art schools, and there's material online to learn how to do it. It's free, it's available. The only thing you need is a gaming PC with a GPU, because without a GPU, can you really do anything nowadays? I don't think so. Right, so to wrap up here, I talked about this new wave of augmentation and automation, which is raising a lot of fears of work displacements, that is really vivid on the West Coast, where all the actors and the writers were on strike last year and the year before, raising concerns around AI and the potential for them to be replaced. But those fears are in fact not really new. Each time there is disruption, that's often so the way you know that this technology is disruptive, then there is a pushback, of course. For example, when physical work was automatized in the early 19th century, the skilled English workers that were working the loom did literally rebel against the automation of their work by those early machines and the steam-powered looming machines and all of that. The Silk Walker in France, same thing. Closer to us in creative domain, when musicians were replaced in theaters and cinema by phonograph. And nowadays we don't have live musicians in cinemas anymore. Sorry, but it used to be the case. Then the American Federation of Musicians spent their money to buy some airtime into prominent journals of the time to denounce the fact that that the musicians were replaced by those robots. Although the phonogram is not really, the record players are not considered like a marvel of technology anymore, but at the time it was. So as is this true that some jobs are being displaced, it is also the case that new jobs are being created. And we don't know yet what the balance is going to be in this particular disruptive moment that we are in. In fact, now you can get full degrees in prompt engineering, which is something you couldn't do 10 years ago. Yeah. So that's where we are at here. There's also other issues with this wave of deep learning models. One of the main ones is that we, even the most talented scientists among us, don't really know how they work. We know exactly how they work in terms of what are they made of and what is the algorithm, but we don't really know why their emergent properties are the ones that are observed right now. So those are really all the challenges that are still remaining around model control, understandability, explainability. We talked about big data, small data, and copyright, the problem with plagiarism and style imitation. We talked about model bias and data availability. There is what we call the long tail of the distribution. Mostly you have Western content. This is most of the data. And then you have all the other cultures that are vastly underrepresented. And the more further you are into that distribution, the more unlikely that any big data generative system is going to be capable of generating content that speaks to you. Then you get the issues of technological employment, the issues of the rise of synthetic media. And now, if you can't trust the content, you can only trust the provider of that content. So what are we going to do with our online world to trust content again? And we see the ramification, at least in America right now, with the different types of news outlet, some of them more legitimate than others, but people can't really tell the difference. And then you get the phenomenological dimension of all those systems, what it implies on our life, our work, and our relationship with our tools. There's, of course, many more issues that I won't talk about today, but I will leave it at that for now. In conclusion, it is obvious that there's been a co-evolution of humans and the technology. In fact, we're humans because we invented technology to some extent. And I do believe myself, away from the fears of AI taking over, that we need to keep with the human tradition of anthropocentric instrumentalism, this idea that these are just tools and we get to decide what tools we make. And at the moment, there's a real need to regulate those tools and their use. And I think every country is now well aware of that and taking that quite seriously. Now, will the legislators be quick enough to really reign over those technologies? That's still sort of an open debate, but I like to stay positive, and I think we should harness the power of machine to expand and support that creativity, of course, not to replace humans. And so with that, I'll let you. This is, of course, work done with colleagues and students, and I'm just representing them today. If you want to know more and listen to a French accent for 25 hours, there's MOOCs with online content around generative art and computational creativity. This is free. And if they try to make you pay because some of the programs are not, then you send me an email and I'll send you some codes. And then again, we organize the AI Music Creativity Conference. Everything is recorded and put online. There's already quite a bit of content there. And I'll finish by thanking my funding buddies in Canada, the National Science and Research Council, the Humanity Research Councils, and then the Canada Council for the Arts, for the artistic part. And I thank you for your attention. And we might have a few minutes for questions. Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for very interesting presentation. Um, so I understand that, you know, like some songs nowadays, they are similar or like sampling from other songs, right? I'm just wondering if Gen AI is able to create kind of like totally new or like songs that are not similar to past songs. Um, yeah, is it possible? And probably my next question is, how can we tell that this song that is generated from AI is totally different to the past song that's yes. Thanks.
Yeah, so the first question, yes, not in my lab, but there's a number of researchers and groups that are working on what we call the two algorithms that you want to research here is called originality search and quality search. So those are algorithms that typically will look at the space of existing content and would do things such as trying to find a point that would still be classified as being from that style, but yet the furthest away possible from everything that is already there. Yeah, so that's sort of a cheap definition of originality. So you still want it to be rock and roll, but you want to be original. Then there's people looking at really letting evolve new aesthetics entirely. And here often what we find is we get things that are really new and original and completely different from any human creation, but it's usually of zero interest to human. Yeah. So yeah, so that's what it is. So he's gonna start sounding like birdsong or other stuff like that, but all of a sudden you're like, is this really music? I'm not sure. So that's the first question. And the second question of recognizing whether content is AI generated or not, this is really an arm race and one that I don't think we're winning. Yeah, and that's true for text. Like, you know, try to see if you have a student writing an essay in front of you, try to determine if this essay, if it's not in front of you, try to determine if this essay was written by the students with or without AI. I don't think we can at the moment, and I don't see us being able to do that in the future, which is why, interestingly, at least I don't know here in Indonesia, but in Canada, we're going back to now oral examination or, you know, examination where I can see everyone doing things, because otherwise people aren't be trusted. And I'm saying that not because I'm against using AI, even in the production of coursework, but we are in this moment where we need to teach our students to do the work without AI and to do the work with AI, because the industry will want that. So we're back to the moment where the calculator was invented. Everyone was afraid nobody would be able to count anymore. And then we had to realize quickly that we still needed to teach people how to count and make mathematics without the calculator, and then eventually allow them to use the calculator, because not using Excel would be a shame. Yeah.
Thank you for very interesting presentations. It reminds me on those days where I sit in front of my computer working on GarageBand with my sons and trying to get his music working. And remember the exam, my piano exam, where I have to compose something with the, Here Comes the Sun, my darling, and then I have to come up with different, the music books just to arrange that. But it's interesting. I was just thinking, I had a conversation with Johan just now. Will this program, I'm sorry, I'm not coming from the AI or data science background, but I'm interested in learning about how, is there any possibility at all that the AI will be able to capture the different notes or the different, I don't know, like, for example, someone with mental health or someone with autism who probably can only enjoy music on a certain level, perhaps with reduced timbre or reduced bass, and then the music that you perhaps told us that perhaps is not enjoyable by human is perhaps something that works for this community. And then have you ever tried to do this?
Absolutely. And so what I said about this idea of flow is, typically when we generate content for the masses. That's what a lot of content, creators are doing. And, music therapy, for example, music therapists, are capable of talking to people with disabilities, or people that are at the fringe of the distribution or outliers in the distribution, right? But usually it costs a lot of money, and we keep that for, final, like kids with final terminal cancer and things like that, because they really need that relief and that help. But with those technology, with this idea of generating the right content for the right person at the right time, if the flow is, no, you're not super good, you're actually super bad, and nobody would care to make content for you, then no, I can. because the AI will be able to adapt to that particular level, which is be a very low level, and find through, in a way, sort of reinforcement learning. Maybe for stress, for example, we use biofeedback, find really if it works for you or not, and track you and generate the right content for you. There's some people, they listen to heavy metal and it calms them. Some other people, they listen to heavy metal and it doesn't calm them at all, right? So everyone is different, and that's why we have now this opportunity of personalizing the content. Another thing I want to say is for marginalized communities, we now are able to using deep learning models to emulate humans and to test, to use artificial intelligence as a judge. And for example, say, hey, if someone is trisomic or has Down syndrome, is this content going to work for them? Then we train a model to be like someone that is Down syndrome and test whether it works on them or not. In fact, we use also that for psychological experiments, right? Because getting ethical approval, let's say I have a project where we do experiments on bullying of kids, bullying kids, while getting ethical approval to actually bully kids to just make an experiment is really, really hard. If I replace the kids by LLMs that are playing kids, then all of a sudden I don't have the ethical problem. Yeah. So there's really a way to use AI as a proxy for all sorts of humans, and including those that are outliers in that distribution, in those distributions, and really refine systems for those populations. And all of that will come at a way lesser cost than it would otherwise. And so we do believe that while with the big data, there's a tendency of the dominant culture to become even more dominant, there is also an option with small data and other approaches to make AI for underrepresented cultures, for example, or underrepresented types of people that are at the long tail of the distribution, without necessarily having all the means that it would take to do that without the AI. And so, yeah, so I think there's a lot of promise in those directions. For example, a lot of endangered languages now are being rescued by AI, whereby the best speaker is actually an AI. All the elders of a community would talk to the AI, and all of a sudden the AI would have more knowledge about that language than any other elders, and the elders are dying eventually. And then eventually that AI could be used to teach the language to all of the young generation of that particular culture. There's a really good example of that in New Zealand and in other indigenous communities across the world. So there's both, again, those are tools, and you can use them for good or for bad, and it's up to the user to decide.
The ethics part is very interesting, and thanks for sharing that, because I believe if we want to work with someone, kids, for example, with ADHD, or kids with perhaps a mental health breakdown, then you probably won't be able to talk to them directly, but the co-participation is still there.
Yeah. So I have a student working, for example, on AI-driven music therapy. Everyone has a phone, and music therapy works, and it works for everyone. And the only reason you probably don't have a music therapist, again, is economical, and the fact that we keep the few music therapists that we have for really, really acute cases. But everyone could use a system that helps regulating the stress, I'm sure. At least that's how I feel when I'm in the Go Grab car in the traffic here in Jakarta.
Hello. This was a really interesting presentation. But I just out of curiosity, so you mentioned that I think the professional musicians, the professional composers, they couldn't really differentiate AI generated music and like human generated music, but then they were the ones who gave the most kind of justifications or excuses or reasons why one is AI. I was wondering if you can maybe tell me a little bit more about what reasoning people came up with. And the reason I asked that too is because I think you also I think it was when you were playing the kind of experimental music, the electroacoustic stuff. That was really interesting to me, because I think you also mentioned something about AI generating new aesthetics. I don't have a very specific question formulated in my mind, but I kind of want to hear more about AI and aesthetics and I guess maybe its implications on music genres, what's considered experimental, transgressive, and that's my question.
Yeah. So to go back to the beginning of your question, there is a little bit of a paradox and the curse of expertise, which is not just limited to what I talked about today. And it's true when we were doing those blind tests, the composers were trying to find the problem in a way in the composition and be like, oh, you know, a composer would never do that. Like, this is really a bad thing to do because of this part of music theory and things like that. And often they would be wrong. You know, sometimes they would be right, sometimes they would be wrong, but they couldn't tell apart for real the AI composed and the human composed music above chance level. So in a sense, you know, they were not better than novice at playing, but because they were experts, their decision, they had a full argumentation about it. While for the novice, it was more intuitively like, I think, well, that sounds like it could be made by a machine. For them, it would be like grounded into their knowledge and their expertise. And that's something interesting to keep in mind with experts, is that experts hopefully would be right more often in many domains. Let's say in medicine, for example, you hope your doctor would be right more often than me. But what's interesting with humans is because they're experts, even when they're wrong, they're sort of, especially experts, they're sort of convinced that they're not wrong. And they have a full reason behind their choice, even if their choice or their decision was a mistake, right? And so with AI, we have AI machines, you know, that first can ingest more knowledge than human can and make informed decision, but also they have less of an ego. And so, you know, for bias and for being wrong and debunking false expertise and stuff, AI is really great because for the case of bias, for example, you know, humans are racist and biased explicitly or implicitly, but they don't like being told. While machines don't care. And now we can measure bias and they counteract on those bias, right? And so what's interesting with AI as intelligent technologies is they're not just intelligent, they're also machines. And as I was saying with emulating different types of characters with AI, there's all sort of things that we can do ethically with AI that would not be ethical to do with humans. And I feel the debunking of expertise is part of that. And to the second part of your question around new aesthetics and experiments, what's interesting here is to sometimes with those technology, not just emulates what we already have, but go into places where we can't go. So what I'm saying, these examples of the music system generating, talking with the visual system and generating an experience that is really integrated at the millisecond or, you know, a few milliseconds, while humans, you know, take 50, 100, 250 milliseconds to react, then all of a sudden I can provide and build an experience that I think is compelling, but that I couldn't do without the machine, right? And so I still am completely in charge, but the machine is this instrument that enables things that would not be possible otherwise. And I think that's the most interesting part of doing that. Imitating, you know, songs of the Beatles for demonstration is nice, but in reality, the Beatles have already done great work. I don't think we need to do more Beatles music necessarily, right? And so pushing the boundaries of those aesthetics and fields is where I think the interesting work lies. But that's my opinion. Are we done? I know the time is. Thanks.